He stood before her, a man she had loved for a decade, his eyes as cold as the marble floors of their multi-million-dollar penthouse. He uttered the words that shattered her world, "I want a divorce." Beside him, his beautiful younger assistant smirked her victory complete. He thought he was leaving his wife with nothing but a broken heart and a pittance. He thought he had all the power, all the money, and the best lawyers money could buy. What he didn't know was that the quiet, unassuming woman he was casting aside was the beloved niece of Jonathan Albright, a name whispered with fear and reverence in the darkest corners of corporate law, a billionaire phantom who didn't just win cases, he ended dynasties. And family to Jonathan Albright was everything. The air in the penthouse, usually filled with the scent of Sophie Byrne's fresh-cut peonies, and the soft jazz she favored, was thick with a chilling silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm, heavy and suffocating. Declan Holt, her husband of 10 years, stood across from her, his custom-tailored suit, looking more like armor than clothing. He had that look on his face, the one he got right before closing a ruthless deal, a mixture of detached ambition and predatory focus. Sophie had once found it thrilling. Now it terrified her. "Sophie, we need to talk." He began, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd built her life around. "Of course, Declan. Is everything all right at the firm?" She instinctively moved to loosen his tie, a ritual she'd performed 1,000 times, but he flinched back, a small, almost imperceptible movement that felt like a slap. "This is about us," he said, his gaze flicking toward the panoramic window overlooking the city lights of New York. He couldn't even look at her. "It's not working anymore. It hasn't been for a while." Sophie's heart began a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" "We're fine. We were just planning the trip to Tuscany." "You were planning it, Sophie," he corrected, finally meeting her eyes. They were arctic. "I've been preoccupied. I've met someone." The words hung in the air, grotesque and alien. Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be happening. They were Declan and Sophie, the golden couple. She had given up her promising career as a painter to support him through his MBA, hosted countless dinners, to charm his superiors, and manage their life with meticulous care so he could focus on his meteoric rise at a prestigious private equity firm. She was the foundation upon which he had built his empire. "Who?" The word was a choked whisper. As if on cue, the polished mahogany door to the penthouse swung open. In walked Kendra Shaw, Declan's junior analyst. She was everything Sophie wasn't. Any more sharp, sleek her ambition, a palpable energy field. She wore a dress that was criminally expensive and utterly inappropriate for a simple visit. She walked not to the living area, but directly to Declan's side, her hand possessively sliding into his. The gesture was a declaration of war. "Kendra." Sophie's voice broke. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The countless late nights at the office, the business trips, the sudden password on his phone, it all coalesced into a monstrous, undeniable truth. "I want a divorce," Declan stated, as if discussing a quarterly report. "I've instructed my lawyer to draw up the papers. They're very generous, all things considered. I'll give you the condo in Miami and a one-time payment. It's more than fair." Fair. Sophie's shock was slowly being consumed by a rising tide of white-hot rage. 10 years of my life, my career, my support, and you offer me a vacation home and a payment. Kendra smirked, a small, cruel twist of her lips. "Don't be dramatic, Sophie. You haven't worked in years. You were living off his success. This is a golden parachute for a life you didn't even build." That was the line. The carefully constructed dam of Sophie's composure burst. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "Both of you, get out of my home." "Technically," Declan said, straightening his tie with a preening motion. "It's my home. Every asset is in my name, a precaution my father insisted on. You'll find that legally you have very little claim to anything. Take the deal. It's the smart play." He tossed a business card onto the coffee table. "Robert Greer, my attorney. Have your lawyer call him." He then turned and, with Kendra clinging to his arm, walked out of the life they had built together, leaving Sophie standing alone in the silent, cavernous space that was no longer her home. The city lights blurred through her tears. He had taken everything. He thought he had left her powerless, penniless, and broken. He had made the gravest miscalculation of his life. The business card on the table felt like a final insult, but as Sophie stared at it, a memory surfaced, a promise made long ago by a man who rarely made them. Her quiet, reclusive uncle. The one her mother always told her to call if she was ever in real trouble. The one Declan had met once years ago and dismissed as a stuffy old academic. Sophie's tears stopped. The trembling in her hands subsided, replaced by a cold resolve. Declan had a high-powered lawyer. But she had family. She picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen to find a number she hadn't dialed in over 5 years. The next 2 days were a blur of hollowed-out shock and nauseating anxiety. Sophie stayed with her friend Laura Chen in a cozy apartment that felt both like a sanctuary and a cage. The official documents arrived via a stone-faced courier. Spreading them out on Laura's dining table, the legal jargon was like a foreign language, but the numbers were brutally clear. Declan's offer, which he'd called generous, was an insult spat in the face of their shared history. He offered her the Miami condo, which she knew was saddled with debt from a recent renovation, and a one-time payout of $250,000. In the context of their lifestyle of the tens of millions Declan managed and earned, it was less than a rounding error. It was what he might spend on a car. Or a few watches. The penthouse, the art collection, she had painstakingly curated their stock portfolio, their savings. All of it was claimed by him, protected by a prenuptial agreement. She'd been rushed into signing days before their wedding, told it was a mere formality for his family's business. "This is a joke, Sophie," Laura said, her eyes blazing with indignation as she scanned the pages. "He's trying to erase you, to pay you off like a fired assistant, not the woman who was his partner for a decade." "He said everything is in his name," Sophie whispered, tracing the letterhead of the law firm, Greer, Caldwell and Finch. It looked expensive and intimidating. "He said I have no claim." "That's what his shark of a lawyer wants you to believe," Laura insisted. "You need to fight this. You can't let him do this to you." The fight felt impossible. Sophie felt like a rowboat caught in the wake of a super yacht. Declan had the money, the connections, the aggression. She had a defunct art degree and a dwindling sense of self-worth. The name on the business card, Robert Greer, was known for his scorched earth tactics. He didn't just win. He humiliated his opponents. That night, unable to sleep, Sophie found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of her and Declan in their early days, young, happy, full of dreams. In one, they were at a family reunion at her mother's insistence. Standing off to the side, looking uncomfortable in the casual setting, was her mother's brother, Jonathan. Uncle Jonathan was a figure of quiet mystery in her life. He was her mother's older brother, a man who had left their humble Midwest town for the East Coast on a scholarship and never truly looked back. He sent lavish but impersonal gifts for birthdays and holidays. He had attended her wedding, stayed for precisely 1 hour, and gifted them a rare first-edition book that Declan had promptly stored away. Declan had been dismissive. "Your uncle is an odd one, Soph. All that money and he dresses like a history professor." But Sophie remembered her mother's words spoken to her a month before she passed away. "Sophie, honey, if you are ever in real serious trouble, the kind of trouble that feels like the world is ending, you call Jonathan. Don't be proud. Just call. He takes care of family." It felt like a last resort, a desperate plea to a virtual stranger. What could he do? He was just a lawyer, wasn't he? Probably semi-retired, living off old money. But Declan's cruelty had pushed her past the point of pride. She was in the kind of trouble that felt like the world was ending. With a deep, shuddering breath, she found his number in her contacts. It was just listed as Uncle Jonathan. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She imagined his detached, formal voice. She imagined having to explain her humiliating failure of a marriage. She almost backed out, but then she pictured Kendra's triumphant smirk and a steel rod of determination solidified in her spine. She pressed the button. It rang twice. "This is Albright." The voice was exactly as she remembered, deep calm and utterly devoid of fluff. There was an unnerving stillness to it, as if he existed in a soundproof room. "Uncle Jonathan, it's Sophie. Sophie Byrne." She immediately cursed herself for using her married name. "Sophie Holt, I mean." There was a pause, but it wasn't an empty one. It felt analytical. "I know who you are, Sophie. It has been a long time. Is everything all right? Your voice sounds strained." The dam broke. The carefully contained grief and rage of the past 48 hours poured out of her. She told him everything. The affair, the public humiliation, Kendra, the insulting divorce papers. Robert Greer's reputation, Declan's threats about the assets. She expected him to interrupt, to offer platitudes, but he just listened. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a perfect vessel for her pain. When she finally finished, her voice raw and hoarse, there was another long pause. She feared she had burdened him, that he would offer a referral to a small-town lawyer and wish her well. "Sophie," he said, and his tone had changed. The academic detachment was gone, replaced by something cold and hard, like sharpened steel. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at a friend's place in the village." "Stay there. Do not sign anything. Do not speak to Declan or his attorney. Do not respond to any communication from them whatsoever. A car will be at your friend's address tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. It will bring you to my office. We have work to do." "Your office? But I can't afford a lawyer like—" He cut her off, but not unkindly. "You are my sister's daughter. You are my family. There is no cost. Declan Holt made a grave error when he decided you were a liability to be discarded. He is about to learn what a real liability looks like." He paused, and in that final moment, Sophie understood the source of the legends that surrounded him. "Tomorrow, we begin the process of dismantling him." He hung up. Sophie sat in the dark, the phone still pressed to her ear. For the first time in days, she wasn't afraid. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time, hope forged in the promise of retribution. The car that arrived the next morning was a black, impossibly sleek sedan, with windows so tinted they looked like polished obsidian. The driver, a man built like a bank vault, simply held the door open for Sophie, nodding respectfully, without a word. The ride through Manhattan was smooth and silent, a stark contrast to the turbulent storm in Sophie's mind. She had expected to be taken to a standard law office, perhaps a floor in a midtown skyscraper. She was wrong. The car pulled into a private gated driveway in front of a historic brownstone on the Upper East Side. It was elegant and understated, with no sign, no plaque, nothing to indicate the power that resided within. The driver escorted her to the heavy oak door, which opened before he could knock. A woman in a perfectly tailored grey suit greeted her. "Miss Byrne, Mr. Albright is expecting you. Please come in." The interior was not an office. It was a sanctuary of quiet power. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound legal texts and first-edition classics, and a faint scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. It was less a law firm, and more the personal library of a king. She was led to a large study at the back of the house, overlooking a serene, manicured garden. Jonathan Albright stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. He was taller than she remembered, dressed not in a flashy suit, but in a simple, perfectly cut charcoal wool jacket and trousers. He turned, and his eyes, a piercing grey, met hers. There was a kindness in them she hadn't seen before, reserved only for her. "Sophie," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm so sorry for what has brought you here." He gestured for her to sit in one of the deep leather armchairs in front of a large mahogany desk. On it, a single file was laid out. "My team has already done a preliminary workup." Sophie was stunned. "Your team? But I only called you last night." A faint, thin smile touched his lips. "When my family is involved, I am very efficient. Let us discuss Declan Holt." For the next hour, Sophie recounted her story again, but this time it was different. Jonathan interjected with precise, incisive questions, not about her feelings, but about facts. When did Declan start his own investment vehicle? What was the name of his offshore holding company? He mentioned once. Who were his closest business associates? What was Kendra Shaw's official title? He took no notes, but his focus was absolute, his memory seemingly photographic. When she handed him the divorce settlement from Robert Greer, he scanned it once, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that shocked her. He took the thick stack of papers and without a word dropped it into the wastebasket beside his desk. "That," he said calmly, "is an offer made by a man who believes he is negotiating with an amateur. He is not. He is negotiating with me." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Sophie, I need to be clear about what happens next. The path we are about to take is not a gentle one. Mr. Greer and your husband play dirty. They will try to slander you, to paint you as a vindictive gold digger. They will lie, they will hide assets, and they will use every dirty trick in their playbook. It will be unpleasant." He paused, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "But they have made two fatal mistakes. First, they underestimated you. Second, they have no idea who I am. My name is not on any letterhead. I am a silent partner in 3 of the most powerful firms in the world. I don't litigate traffic disputes, Sophie. I restructure nations' debts. I handle hostile takeovers for corporations that could buy small countries. I advise people whose names you only read about in history books. And when I take on a personal case, I do not lose." The sheer weight of his words settled over her. This was the man Declan had dismissed as a stuffy academic. "Declan thinks his wealth is a fortress," Jonathan continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "He is about to find out it is a house of cards in a hurricane. We will not be asking for a fair settlement. We will not be asking for the penthouse and a portion of his portfolio. That is the game he wants to play. We will play a different one." He stood and walked over to a credenza, pouring her a glass of water. "Our objective is twofold. First, we secure your future, not with his scraps, but with the full half of the marital assets he has illegally concealed. Second, we ensure that Declan Holt understands in no uncertain terms the profound consequences of betraying my sister's daughter." He handed her the glass, his expression shifting from iron to avuncular care. "This will be difficult for you, but you will not be alone. I have the best forensic accountants, private investigators, and legal minds on the continent. They now work for you. All I need from you is your trust and your permission to act." Sophie looked at this man, this enigmatic powerhouse who was her blood. In him, she saw not just a lawyer, but a protector. She saw the strength her mother had always spoken of. She remembered Declan's smug face, Kendra's cruel smirk, and the feeling of being discarded like trash. She took a sip of water, her hand steady now. She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw the family resemblance in the steely resolve of her eyes. "You have it," Sophie said, her voice clear and strong. "You have my permission. Do it." Jonathan Albright gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was the nod of a general who had just been given the order to advance. "Excellent. Now let's talk about the shell corporation he registered in the Cayman Islands 3 years ago. The one he thinks no one knows about." Declan Holt was enjoying the spoils of his new life. With Sophie gone, Kendra had moved into the penthouse, her influence spreading like an invasive vine, replacing Sophie's elegant taste with something more modern and ostentatious. At his office, he felt untouchable. He had just secured a massive round of funding for a new tech merger, a deal that would make him a legend in the private equity world. The divorce was a minor annoyance, a loose end to be tidied up. He and his lawyer, Robert Greer, sat in Greer's glass-walled office overlooking Central Park. "So what's the word?" Declan asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Has she caved yet? I assume she's hired some second-rate divorce attorney who's billing her by the hour to cry on his shoulder." Greer chuckled a slick, self-satisfied sound. "Not yet. I received a letter this morning. She's retained counsel." He slid a piece of paper across his desk. The letterhead was simple, almost archaic, J. Albright, ESQ. Declan squinted at it. "Albright, never heard of him. Some old-timer, probably. Is he good?" "There are a few Albrights in the bar registry. None of them are big names in matrimonial law. Probably a semi-retired friend of the family. He's asking for preliminary financial disclosures. Standard procedure. We'll send him the basics, the doctored statements we prepared. He'll posture demand a bit more, and we'll settle for a little over our initial offer to make him look good." "She'll be out of your hair in a month," Greer said with a wave of his hand. "Good," Declan said, taking a satisfying sip of his scotch. "The faster the better. I want this merger closed and my life simplified before the end of the quarter." He had no idea that hundreds of miles away, in a secure, soundproof data center in a discreet Virginia suburb, Jonathan Albright's team was already light years beyond preliminary disclosures. Jonathan didn't play by the standard rules of discovery, because he knew men like Declan never would. He operated on the principle that the truth is always there. You just have to know how to listen to the silence. His lead forensic accountant, a quiet man named David Chen, coincidentally. Laura Chen's older brother, a fact Jonathan filed away as a pleasant irony, was a genius at navigating the digital ghosts of hidden money. "He's arrogant," David said to Jonathan over a secure video link, pointing at lines of code on his screen. Declan Holt uses a top-tier encryption for his primary servers, but he's got a secondary personal server routed through a proxy in Panama. He thinks it's his private playground. It's where he keeps the real books. For 2 weeks, David's team worked not with hacking tools, but with meticulous legal precision. They subpoenaed server hosting companies, cross-referenced IP logs with Declan's travel records, and pieced together a digital breadcrumb trail. They found the ghost server, and on it, they found the real Declan Holt. It was far worse than just hiding marital assets. Declan was running a classic pump and dump scheme within his own firm's merger deal. He was using a network of offshore shell corporations, the very ones he used to hide his money from Sophie, to artificially inflate the stock value of the smaller tech company. Once the merger was announced, he and a small circle of co-conspirators planned to sell off their shares, making hundreds of millions, while the parent company and its investors would be left holding a massively overvalued and ultimately worthless asset. It wasn't just unethical. It was felony-level securities fraud. Jonathan Albright sat in his study, reading the report from David's team. His face remained impassive, but a cold fire burned in his eyes. Declan wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a common criminal dressed in a bespoke suit. This changed the game entirely. Meanwhile, Sophie was undergoing her own transformation. Jonathan insisted she be involved in every step. He had her sit in on meetings, explaining the complex financial structures in simple, clear terms. He wanted her to understand the depth of Declan's deception, not just emotionally, but intellectually. He also assigned a junior associate, a bright young man named Ben Carter, to work with her, organizing her personal records, old emails, photo albums with dates, travel itineraries. Every piece of your life together is a thread, Ben explained. Mr. Albright believes in weaving a complete tapestry. Declan will claim you contributed nothing. We will prove you were the entire framework of his success, making everything he built marital property. Slowly, the fog of victimhood began to lift from Sophie. She found old emails where she'd given Declan advice on a difficult client notes she had taken that helped him prepare for a major presentation, photos of them at events she had single-handedly organized to advance his career. She was not a freeloader. She was an uncredited, unpaid partner. The anger that had been a dull ache now sharpened into a fine, dangerous point. She was no longer just fighting for money. She was fighting for her history, for her identity. One afternoon, Ben brought her a new file. We're preparing for depositions. Mr. Albright wants you to review this. It was a complete psychological and financial profile of Kendra Shaw, her college debts, her social media history, her ambitious career path, her previous relationships with wealthy, powerful men. Jonathan's team had left no stone unturned. "Why do we need all this?" Sophie asked, feeling a bit queasy. "Mr. Albright says that to defeat an enemy, you must understand what they truly want," Ben said. "Declan wants power. Mr. Albright believes Kendra Shaw only wants what that power can buy her." A plan was forming. Not just a legal strategy, but a complete and total unraveling. Declan and Greer were preparing for a divorce settlement. Jonathan Albright was preparing for a war on all fronts. He let Greer's office send over their doctored, incomplete financial statements. He didn't challenge them. He just filed them away. He let Declan grow more confident, more arrogant, more certain of his quick and easy victory. He was giving him a long rope, waiting for the perfect moment to let him hang himself with it. The deposition was scheduled to take place in a neutral conference room in a downtown law building. The room was designed to be sterile and intimidating, a long, polished table, uncomfortable chairs, and a single unblinking camera in the corner. Declan Holt arrived with Robert Greer, both men looking confident and relaxed, as if they were stopping in on their way to a celebratory lunch. Declan wore a smirk that never quite left his face. He saw Sophie sitting on the opposite side of the table and gave her a nod that was both condescending and pitying. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional style, and she wore a simple but impeccably tailored dark blue dress. There was a stillness about her he didn't recognize. Beside her sat a bland-looking, middle-aged man who introduced himself as Ben Carter. Declan assumed he was her lead attorney. Greer leaned over to Declan. "See, not even the main guy showed up. He sent a junior. They're not serious. We'll be out of here in 2 hours." The court reporter swore Declan in. Ben Carter began with a series of simple foundational questions about his career, his income, and the timeline of his marriage. It was boilerplate, and Declan answered with practiced ease, occasionally glancing at Greer for an approving nod. An hour into the deposition, the door to the conference room opened silently. Jonathan Albright entered. He didn't make a sound, simply taking a seat in a chair against the back wall behind Sophie's line of sight, but in Declan's direct view. He opened a thin, leather-bound folder and began to read as if he were merely an observer. Declan's flow faltered for a second. He glanced at Greer, who just shrugged, equally perplexed. Who was this old man? Ben Carter continued with his questions, but now they began to subtly shift. Mr. Holt, let's turn to your corporate assets. Can you list for the record all entities holding companies or investment vehicles in which you hold a controlling interest? Following Greer's coaching, Declan listed the main domestic companies, the ones that were already a matter of public record. He conveniently omitted the network of offshore shells. "That's everything," he said with finality. "Are you certain, Mr. Holt?" Ben asked calmly. "You are under oath." "Yes, I'm certain," Declan snapped, growing irritated. It was then that Jonathan Albright closed his folder with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. He stood up and walked slowly to the table, placing the folder in front of Ben. He nodded at Sophie a brief, reassuring gesture before turning his full attention to Declan. His grey eyes were like chips of ice. "Mr. Carter, if I may," Jonathan said, his voice quiet, yet commanding the entire room. Greer immediately bristled. "And you are?" Greer demanded. "Jonathan Albright, co-counsel," he replied, his gaze never leaving Declan. The name finally registered with a junior partner from Greer's firm, sitting in the corner, whose eyes went wide with dawning horror. He frantically began typing into his phone. Jonathan turned a page in the folder. "Mr. Holt, I have just a few clarifying questions. On May 12th of last year, you were in Grand Cayman. Is that correct?" Declan froze. "It was a vacation." "Indeed," Jonathan said smoothly. "And did your vacation happen to include a visit to the offices of Triton Global Holdings?" Declan's face paled. Triton was his primary shell corporation, the linchpin of his entire hidden financial empire. "I don't recall." "Perhaps this will refresh your memory," Jonathan said, sliding a document across the table. It was a high-resolution surveillance photo of Declan leaving a specific building in Georgetown, a briefcase in his hand. "Or this." He slid another. It was the incorporation document for Triton Global Holdings, signed by Declan Holt. Greer shot to his feet. "Objection! Where did you get this? This is inadmissible harassment." Jonathan didn't even glance at him. He looked at the court reporter. "Please note for the record that Mr. Greer is objecting to a question about a document his client signed under his own name. He then looked back at Declan. Lying under oath, Mr. Holt, is perjury. It's a felony. Before we continue, I want to give you one opportunity to amend your previous testimony regarding the full list of your corporate assets. Declan was stammering, his confident facade crumbling into dust. He looked at Greer for help, but his own lawyer was staring at Jonathan Albright, the name now clearly having registered. Robert Greer had built his career bullying smaller firms. He was now facing a leviathan. Jonathan wasn't finished. Let's move on to the pending merger with Aerodyne Tech. Your firm is managing the acquisition, correct? Yes, Declan mumbled, his throat dry. And you've personally guaranteed the financial stability and valuation of Aerodyne to your investors. Of course, it's a sound company. Is it? Jonathan asked, his voice deceptively soft. He slid another document across the table. It was a complex chart, a web of transactions showing money flowing from Triton Global and two other linked shell companies into buying vast quantities of Aerodyne stock over the past 6 months, artificially tripling its market price. Can you explain this network of purchases, Mr. Holt? The ones that seem to be propping up the company's value right before your firm acquires it for an inflated price, because it looks a great deal like securities fraud to the SEC, and they tend to be very interested in such things. The room was utterly silent. Declan Holt stared at the chart, the blood draining from his face. This wasn't a divorce deposition. It was an execution. He wasn't just losing his money. He was losing his freedom. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. My niece Sophie has been through a great deal of distress. We are here today to discuss a fair and equitable division of the marital assets, all of them, and I find myself in a very generous mood. So let us for a moment forget about the SEC. Let us forget about the U.S. Attorney's Office. And let's you and I and Mr. Greer here have a frank discussion about what a truly generous settlement for Sophie might look like. Take your time. We have the rest of the day. Declan looked from the damning evidence on the table to the unblinking eye of the camera, and then to the cold, unwavering gaze of the man who had just systematically dismantled his entire world in less than 10 minutes. He was trapped, utterly and completely. The deposition was a bloodbath. When Kendra Shaw was called in next, she walked in with the same confident swagger as Declan. She had been coached to portray Sophie as an uninvolved spendthrift wife who was emotionally unstable. Jonathan allowed her to give her rehearsed speech. He let her lie about the timeline of her affair with Declan. He let her paint her self-serving picture. Then he calmly presented her with her own evidence copies of her credit card statements, showing lavish gifts from Declan dating back 2 years. Hotel folios from their business trips, booked on a corporate card linked to one of Declan's shell companies. And text messages subpoenaed from the phone company, where she and Declan openly discussed his plan to hide assets from his soon-to-be ex-wife. Kendra's testimony collapsed into a pathetic series of "I don't recall" and "I'm not sure." When Jonathan presented her with an email where she discussed the Aerodyne Tech deal with Declan, boasting about the monster payday they were going to get, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The damage was done. She was not just a mistress. She was a co-conspirator. That evening, a shell-shocked Robert Greer called for an immediate settlement conference. The bravado was gone, replaced by the quiet panic of a man whose career was flashing before his eyes. They met not in a sterile conference room, but in the quiet, imposing study of Jonathan Albright's brownstone. Declan looked like a ghost. He hadn't slept. The man who had walked into the deposition, a master of the universe, now looked like a cornered animal. Kendra was not with him. All right, Albright. Greer began, his voice strained. "What do you want?" Jonathan sat behind his desk, Sophie seated beside him. She was no longer a spectator. She was a partner in this judgment. "What I want, Mr. Greer, is irrelevant," Jonathan said calmly. "What my client is entitled to is what we are here to discuss. And what she is entitled to is a full and complete half of a marital estate that by our forensic accountant's conservative estimate is valued at approximately $94 million. Not the paltry $3 million you declared." Declan choked. 94. That's insane. That's my entire net worth. Everything I've built. No. Sophie said, her voice steady and clear. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. "It's everything we built. And you used it to commit federal crimes." The directness of her accusation struck Declan silent. Jonathan slid a meticulously prepared binder across the desk. "This is the settlement agreement. It is not a negotiation. It is a statement of fact." Greer opened it. His eyes widened as he read the terms. The Manhattan penthouse title to be transferred to Sophie Byrne, free and clear of all liens. The full art collection independently appraised at $12 million. The Hamptons Beach House. A cash settlement of $35 million to be transferred from his known accounts within 72 hours. Declan would assume all marital debts, including the underwater mortgage on the Miami condo. A permanent, irrevocable, non-disclosure agreement, preventing Declan from ever speaking publicly or privately about Sophie or her family. "This is impossible," Greer stammered. "This would ruin him. He'd be left with nothing but debt and his stake in a company that's about to be investigated." "That is an astute summary," Jonathan said, his voice flat. "It is also the only alternative to option B." "Option B?" Declan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jonathan picked up a second, much slimmer folder from his desk. It was unmarked. "Option B is quite simple. You reject this settlement. In that event, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, a full copy of our findings, the offshore accounts, the evidence of perjury, the entire pump-and-dump scheme, complete with your lover's corroborating emails, will be delivered via messenger to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Your assets will be frozen pending a federal investigation. Your firm will fire you. Your investors will sue you. And you, Mr. Holt, will very likely be trading your bespoke suits for a government-issued jumpsuit. He let the words hang in the silent room. "You will lose everything anyway," Jonathan concluded. "The only difference is that, with option A, you get to keep your freedom. It is by any measure an extraordinarily generous deal. You have 1 hour to decide." Declan looked at the papers, his mind racing. It was checkmate. Jonathan Albright hadn't just come to the game with a better strategy. He had flipped the entire board over. He had used the law not as a tool for negotiation, but as a weapon of absolute destruction. All of Declan's cleverness, his ruthlessness, his hidden accounts, they were all just ammunition that Jonathan had turned against him. He looked at Sophie, really looked at her for the first time in years. He saw not the docile, supportive wife he had decided to discard, but a formidable woman with eyes of steel. He had poked a sleeping bear, only to find out it was guarding the entrance to a dragon's lair. His shoulders slumped in utter defeat. His empire was gone. His reputation was shattered. His future was a black hole of debt and disgrace. "I'll sign it," he croaked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Robert Greer, looking pale, simply nodded, already calculating how to distance himself from his now toxic client. Jonathan pushed a pen across the desk. A wise decision. As Declan signed away his empire, Sophie felt no elation, no joy, just a quiet, profound sense of justice. It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. It was about reclaiming the decade he had tried to erase. He hadn't just lost a divorce case. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by a power he could never have comprehended. The weeks following the settlement conference were strangely quiet. The cataclysm of Declan Holt's downfall didn't happen with a thunderous roar, but with the silent, creeping finality of a rising tide. Sophie heard the news not from a triumphant phone call from her uncle, but in trickles and whispers from the social circles she had once inhabited. A call from a former friend, her voice dripping with faux concern, mentioning Declan had abruptly resigned from the firm. A small dry article in the financial section online about the collapse of the Aerodyne Tech merger, citing unforeseen internal complications. The news was sanitized, scrubbed of its damning details by corporate lawyers, but the message was clear. Declan was out. He was erased. Then came the final pathetic bookend to that chapter of her life. Laura called her voice a mixture of pity and disgust. Kendra Shaw had been seen at the airport boarding a flight to London. A mutual acquaintance had reported that she had left Declan a terse note and had taken with her a Patek Philippe watch he'd just given her, a parting gift she apparently felt she had earned. He had traded his entire kingdom for a mercenary's fleeting loyalty, and in the end was left with nothing but debt and the hollow echo of his own arrogance. Sophie felt no thrill of victory, no surge of vengeful pleasure. There was only a profound, somber sense of closure. The war was over. The ghost that had haunted her was exorcised. Her first act of reclamation was to return to the penthouse. Walking through the door with the keys feeling heavy and foreign in her hand was a surreal experience. The space was still filled with the ghosts of her past life. Kendra's sterile, modernist furniture, all chrome and black leather, felt like an insult to the home Sophie had so lovingly curated. For a day, she simply walked the silent rooms, touching the cold marble countertops, looking out at the sprawling city that had once felt like their shared throne. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed. The next morning, she made a decision. She hired a team of movers with a simple instruction. Take everything that isn't nailed down, donate the furniture, sell the electronics. I want the space empty. She didn't watch them work. Instead, she went to her storage unit, a place she hadn't visited in years, and unsealed a large, dusty trunk. Inside, protected by cloth, were her old art supplies. The familiar sharp scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and old charcoal filled her senses, and it felt like breathing for the first time in a decade. When she returned to the penthouse, it was a cavernous, empty shell. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. In the center of the vast, empty living room, she unrolled a canvas, set up an easel, and began to paint. At first her hands felt clumsy, her mind blank. But then something broke free. All the pain, the betrayal, the rage, and the slow dawning hope of the past few months poured out of her. She painted with a feverish intensity, losing track of time, forgetting to eat, forgetting everything but the colors and the shapes forming before her. She was not just painting a picture. She was rebuilding a soul. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, the art collection Declan had viewed as mere assets on a spreadsheet, she sold them all. It was a systematic dismantling of her past, a cleansing by fire. She worked with a team of financial advisors, recommended by Jonathan, her own team, and found a deep, surprising satisfaction in the work. She was no longer a passive beneficiary of wealth. She was its intelligent, decisive steward. With the immense capital she now commanded, she didn't retreat into a quiet life of luxury. She went on the offensive for her dreams. She found a beautiful, neglected building in Soho, a former textile factory with incredible light and soaring ceilings. She poured her energy and resources into transforming it, not just managing decorators, but directing architects and contractors. She was building something that was wholly and completely hers. She named it the Byrne Gallery. Her own name, the one she was born with, was etched in elegant steel letters beside the door. The opening night was a resounding success. The space was alive, filled with the vibrant, pulsing energy of New York's art scene. Critics, collectors, artists, and friends mingled their voices a happy buzz under the high ceilings. The walls were covered not with the cold, calculated investments Declan had favored, but with the bold, passionate work of emerging artists, the very people she wanted to champion. Sophie moved through the crowd, a glass of champagne in her hand, feeling an intoxicating sense of presence. People didn't greet her as Declan Holt's wife. They greeted her as Sophie Byrne, the gallery's visionary founder. The congratulations were not for a successful dinner party she had hosted, but for a professional and artistic triumph she had orchestrated. She saw Laura across the room, raising a glass to her, with a beaming, teary-eyed smile. She saw Ben Carter, the young associate from her uncle's team, looking around with genuine admiration. But it was in a quiet alcove, looking at a particularly striking abstract canvas, that she found the man who had made it all possible. Jonathan Albright stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking more like a proud professor observing a star pupil than a corporate titan. He was watching her, a rare, soft smile on his face. "I could never have done this without you," Sophie said, her voice thick with an emotion that ran deeper than simple gratitude. "You gave me back my life." Jonathan turned his gaze from her to the art on the wall. "I disagree," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Declan Holt took a hostage. I merely provided the key to the cell. I opened a door for you, Sophie. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it and build all of this." He gestured around at the thriving, beautiful space she had created. "This," he said, "has nothing to do with me. This is not the result of a legal victory. This is the result of your resilience, your talent, and your will. Your mother always said you had a fire in you. You just let someone else's shadow dim it for a while." He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "I am proud of you, not for winning a fight, but for remembering who you were meant to be all along." His words settled in her heart, a powerful, validating truth. He hadn't just been her avenger. He had been her mentor, forcing her to see the strength within herself. Later that evening, long after the last guest had departed, Sophie stood alone in the center of her silent gallery. The moonlight streamed through the large front windows, casting long shadows on the floor. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, a woman standing tall, surrounded by art and beauty, the architect of her own world. Declan had tried to make her a footnote in his story. Instead, she had become the author of her own epic. She was no longer a victim, no longer a wife, no longer defined by anyone but herself. She was Sophie Byrne, and as she took a deep, cleansing breath, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace born not of revenge, but of a profound and victorious reclamation. Her canvas was no longer empty. It was vibrant, full of life, and entirely her own. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a divorce. It was a story about power. The arrogant power of a man who sees people as assets, and the quiet, unshakable power of a family that refuses to let one of its own be broken. Sophie's journey from a heartbroken wife to a commanding figure in her own right reminds us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest betrayals. It shows that while money and influence can build an empire, integrity, loyalty, and a touch of righteous fury can bring it all crashing down. What do you think? Was this justice, or was it a revenge served cold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Sophie's story and want to hear more tales of incredible twists and ultimate justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light.